Hey people, fellow crafting DMs, GMs, players, wargamers, random bro who stumbled into the strange corner of the internet. My name's Greg, and I'm kicking off this channel in celebration of a global community and hobby that have meant so much to me over the past, I don't know how many years I've been at this. I'm sure I'll unpack what I mean by that in subsequent videos, but for now, I simply want to help you in your engagement with the tabletop hobby. In a stroke of wild originality, decided to kick off this inaugural series with a 3-part tutorial on a modular dungeon system. That's right, yet another one. So this one's going to be a little different. It's not going to be tiles. You certainly can make tiles, but it's going to be room by room, hallway by hallway, and it's going to be without a grid. Now, if that doesn't really interest you, I do invite you to stick around because you might find something that you're interested in. Either the brick carving, the working with XPS foam, or the rock texture. So, let's take a look.
So I'm going to talk at you for a moment, but if you want to skip straight to the build, go to 6 minutes and 40 seconds on this video. So, as you can see, each room and hallway section are made individually. This is a matter of personal preference for me. I like building everything in a unique way, and I don't really like the tile production assembly process. But there is one organizing principle, the hallway sections. Each hallway section, or each corridor section, is approximately 6 inches by 3 inches using 1/2 inch insulation foam. And the reason there are these dimensions is because I wanted 2 inches for the width of the hallway, and the reason they are 6 inches long is when they're propped up on the descent, it creates an incline that's slightly below 30 degrees. And why that's important is that any incline that's about 30 degrees or less is ideal to place miniatures. And I will, of course, demonstrate a better way of making these descending hallway segments in a later video. Because there is a rock texture on the bottom and on the outside walls of each segment, they can be used in a number of different ways, such as underground dwellings, cave tiles that are a little too symmetrical, but in a pinch, they'll work. They don't have walls. What's another way to use them? They can be the magically created terrain in another plane of existence, such as the astral plane. Or they can be used in a number of different terrain settings. Desert, there's an interesting contrast in the paint scheme. Or, forests, however you want to do it. And that's just the ideas I have off the top of my head. And that's why, one of the reasons why the rock texture is on there.
Now you might be saying, pump the brakes, random internet dude who I've just met. No grids for D&D? Well, yeah. In my experience, grids break immersion and they slow down gameplay, especially when players start having to count tiles in their turn, and then someone goes in the initiative slot right before them and ruins their plans, and then they have to recount 45 squares and cunning action 60 feet this way, and then everything's screwed. Here's an alternative. Just find and implement that's 6 inches long for your movement range. Get some spell templates, some range rulers, and have a blast. You'll find that your players might actually really like skirmish rules. There's thousands of groups across the universe playing theater of the mind, so it's completely doable, and it might be a refreshing break. Now, I made these tiles, I'm going to stop saying tiles, this system, because I don't want to just use it for D&D. I want to use it for a fantasy campaign using the Genesis system, which uses abstract range bands. That's actually going to be in favoring the D&D setting, but not the D&D. I want to use them for my D&D campaign. Also, something like Vampire Dark Ages, a nice crypt, Sith Tomb, and Star Wars, and, I don't know, somewhere in Europe for a Shadowrun. Who knows? And then Lord of the Rings strategy battle game, Warhammer, whatever. I wanted to be able to use this in a very system agnostic way. Have multiple levels, so you can have something like the Dungeon Siege. Oh yeah. Mass combat, RPG encounters, and just very war game friendly. If you wanted to do a skirmish in a dwarf kingdom, you could just carve out certain rooms, and have it be whatever you want. But I'm going to stop talking, and we're going to get to building. And what we're going to do by the end of this episode is turn this sheet of extruded polystyrene. This is insulation foam that you buy at the hardware store that comes in 6x4 sheets. And it's either by Dow, which is the blue one you can find at Lowe's if you live in North America, or the pink kind you'll find at Home Depot. One's blue, one's pink. Works the same. Comes in a 6x4 sheet, so you'll need to headbutt it, kick it, karate chop it, do whatever you have to do to get it into your car. You bungee it to your bicycle, take it on a public bus or the subway, get it back home, and then we can build some dungeon tiles. So, in the next, 8 minutes, we're going to be turning that into these things. Episode 2 is the cave texture on the bottom of these things. Episode 3 is painting. Also, stand by for deserts and house. Let's get cracking.
Okay, so we're going to build this thing to the soothing tones of royalty-free 80s retro synth. We're going to start with our main construction material, extruded polystyrene. Got this from Lowe's because I get a discount. You can use the pink stuff from Home Depot if you want, as I said. A carpenter's square. This particular one is from the dollar store. An optional secondary metal ruler to make your life easier. Sharpies, fine point Sharpies. What am I looking for? A hobby knife or a box cutter will serve you well here. And that's about it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take off one of our broken pieces of extruded polystyrene and start cutting out a workable shape that has a bunch of right angles. In this case, it's going to be a rectangular shape. Now, I'm not cutting all the way through, and I'm also not worried about being too exact. If you make just a surface cut, you can score it and just snap it. It's pretty easy to work with. You don't need hot wire tools. So then I'm just measuring out 3 inches on each side. This will be a hallway section. Once that's measured out, I simply take a box cutter, score it, snap it. Checking all the angles. And cutting off any excess so that it's 6 inches long. The reason I'm using a box cutter, not my X-Acto knife, for this part is because foam eats blades. It will dull your X-Acto knife blade like nobody's business, so I'm just using these box cutters. Alright, now I'm making a room. I'm measuring out 2 inches from the corners on each side because it's going to be a hexagon. And then I'm just measuring out the cuts I'm going to make. This is where the carpenter square, or any sort of T-square, is really going to help out. Once all my floor sections cut out, I'm going to start cutting out walls. Now the walls, you can make them any length. I just use scraps of foam and offcuts, but you do want to make them 1 inch tall for this particular build. Now, a lot of people don't use walls. I know there's a gameplay perspective that it makes it hard to reach into, or makes it hard for players to see what's going inside. But I'm privileging aesthetic over functionality right now, because what I really want underground is to portray visually the claustrophobic terror of fighting in close quarters, surrounded by tons of rock. Above you, below you, no escape. So that's why there are walls. And because you can use unused pieces to stack them up and create multiple levels of the dungeon. Now, along each room, I'm measuring out a 1/2 inch so I don't draw the brick texture where I'm going to place my walls, saving myself some work. I also measured out a 1-inch doorway, and then once everything is squared off, ready to go, I take a smaller ruler and with an X-Acto knife at about 1/4-inch intervals, I start making guidelines for the brick texture. So I'm just scoring the top of the foam, and this will really make it easier to draw nicer bricks. So each room is different. This is going to be a room that houses, I don't know, perhaps an actual living quarters. So I want the bricks to be more precise, and that's why I'm using a ruler to start the texture with. Once that's done, I take a Sharpie and I start pressing it into the cuts to make more exaggerated guidelines, or not guidelines, excuse me, grout lines. I want these bricks to really pop out. And there you have it. Once that's done, I start cutting perpendicular to those guidelines in a staggered sort of way with my X-Acto knife, making really small cuts, and I'm going to do the same exact thing with the Sharpie. Drag them back through the cuts to exaggerate the grout line. I like to stagger my brick textures so it looks more believable. And as you can see, it's starting to come to fruition here. I do mostly simple brick patterns just to save time. So at this point I'm about 40 minutes into the build, and there's the brick texture. Now, to texture this even more, I'm going to do the old school method of using a ball of tin foil. I'm pressing down with a reasonable amount of force in order to create a randomized undulating surface, and it's shaking the whole table. Sorry for the Wobble Cam 5000. Then after that, to give little erosion pockets in the bricks, I'm going to slap it with a wire brush, which will puncture the surface in a number of random ways all over the brick texture. Now for the walls, I just dry fit them first, make sure they're the right width. Well, hell, they should be the right width. And then I do the same exact thing, cutting out guidelines, punching out the grout lines. Then I just come in with a Sharpie, and I'm not really bothering to make 2 cuts here. I'm just coming in with a Sharpie and doing that. Why am I using a Sharpie as opposed to a pen or a pencil? It's because there are solvents in the Sharpie which melt foam, making the whole thing a lot easier. I'm also getting some bricks on the tops so you can see the walls looking down into the tile. Segment. Hit that with the texturing tools. There you go. Make more than you think you need to make. Then I'm taking a wire brush, and along the outside edge where I didn't put the texture, where the walls are getting glued down, I'm basically carving out grooves so the hot glue has something to seep into and around, and this will cause a stronger bond between the 2 pieces of foam. And then I'm just gluing in place, cutting off the excess. I'm just eyeballing the cuts that I need to make to get the 2 angles to meet together in a seamless fashion. And I'm not too worried if the measurements are a little off, because you're going to be putting the rock texture all over the outside walls, and that's going to cover up a lot of mistakes. I just keep working those things around. And there you have it, leaving out a little slot for the door. Once that's in place, I'm going to just take the Sharpie and freehand draw some bricks along the threshold. I'm not too concerned with these being super great, getting the inside of the door frame. So when doing something like a T intersection wall segment or dungeon segment, you might be concerned about the bond because there's really not a lot of foam or any supports, but you would be surprised that how strong it is once you take the wire brush and rough up the connecting surfaces. That hot glue will seep into all the cracks and crevices. And I always test fit my rooms together before drawing in the outside textures along the doorways and the pathways, just so I don't have to cut them off and redraw them. And so I'm not using any hot wire tools for this. There are tiny manufacturing errors and mistakes, but they really don't show up once the paint's on them, and it's a very forgiving process. And that's basically how you do it. It's so simple. I got all these 4 pieces up to this standard in about 2.5 hours. I work in batches of 4 generally. And that about wraps it up.
And thanks so much for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, but only if you want to. See you next time.